Hey guys, how you doing today? So I thought I'd make a video real quick of how to put these masks together that I've been doing. I got the pattern online and you just print it out and then you cut out around the edges. There's actually 4 sizes. The other ones are under my tripod, so I don't want to pull it up here, but there's 2 smaller kid sizes, woman, and the last one is men size, or really just smaller adult, bigger adult, in my opinion. But here's how it goes, and I'm going to try to do this kind of quick. I have some that are partially made, so it kind of helps get through that process quicker. So the first thing we have to do, of course, is cut out the pattern. These do not have a seam allowance on them, so you have to allow a 1/4 inch all the way around for seam allowance. So what I'm doing is just setting it down using my chalk pencil here to draw out the outline. And one thing that it has in the instructions, and I'll link the video, I'll link the page down below for where I got this pattern, and she has a video as well. But so you trace out one, and this one you don't need any seam allowance on the first one. You don't need any seam allowance on the back side, but you do for the rest. So you would need about a 1/4 inch. Just make sure that your seam allowance is the same all the way around and whatever is comfortable for you. I'm not really great at drawing out a seam allowance, apparently. I can't get it straight. So that would be, and then all the way to the bottom of the fabric over here. So that would be your first piece. You'd cut it on this wider line. The other piece, you still need the 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. So we would draw this out. And then you would add your seam allowance around the front. This one will end up being right on the edge of the paper there. It'll be all the way to the bottom here and up this way. But on this one, you need a seam allowance back here, and you need at least 1 inch or 2, because this will end up being folded over and the casing that you put the elastic through. So I've actually been giving them pretty good tails just because I want to make it easier on myself. So that would be about the 2 pieces that I'll cut out. So once these 2 pieces are cut out, then you have to sew them together. I actually almost forgot. The other thing that you have to do is take a non-woven material. It can be interfacing. Honestly, I've been reusing just reusable grocery bags, so I've got a good stash of them down here. A lot of the ones that I've been using have been Winco, Walmart, Safeway, just, you know, your regular reusable shopping bags. Now, they have to be a non-woven material, which is, you know, they just kind of look like this. And the other thing is they can't have too much printing on it. So like when I cut this one out, I would have to be really careful where I place the pattern, because the plastic here ends up being a bad filter. So on this one, I could easily put one of them up here. I could put another one down here. And the ones on the reusable bag like this, you would do like the first one here, where it doesn't need any seam allowance on the back, but you need the 1/4 around the front parts, the other 3 parts of it. Okay, so I didn't mention that you need 2 pieces of each of the things that we just did. Now, my fabric, my black fabric, was folded in half, so actually it was folded in 4, so I really have 4 of those. And also, if there is some printing on your bag, as long as it's in this back half over here or really far up to the top or bottom, it doesn't actually hurt anything. Like both of these have a little on the back half. The important thing is that you're breathing through this curved part of the mask up in here. So you have to make sure that the front part here doesn't have that printing that's going to restrict your breathing, because the whole point of this line is a filter. With it being a non-woven material, it has a much smaller gap between fibers, and since the coronavirus is such a small particle, this is more effective than the cotton. And the cotton I'm using is just broadcloth or quilting cotton. It's a pretty tight weave. I've also heard you can use like a high thread count sheet, because the important thing is that you have the smallest weave possible. You can use something like a linen, as long as it's a tight woven, nice linen and not a cheaper linen-like or something that's a wider weave. The important thing is that it's a breathable but tight woven fabric for these to be effective, truly. So the next thing you do is you take 2 of your smaller black ones, or whatever color you chose. Trust me, not all of mine have been this boring black. I'm just making 30 of them right now. And I have them in various stages of doneness over here to make this a lot easier to do the video. So you take the 2 inside pieces and your 2 filter pieces and set them together. And because I'm eyeballing the seam allowance and also cutting them out separately, there's going to be a little variance for what you do. So once I have them all lined up, I double check, and I already did this one before I got to video, but I double check that they line up. And if one piece is longer than the other, because I had cut its seam allowance a little wider, I just trim it down so they match, because it'll just make it easier later. So once you have them set like this, you want to sew this center seam right here. So this is my beautiful sewing machine that Kevin got me for Christmas that I am super appreciative of, because the old one that's over there in a corner somewhere, I think it's right here in the video, kind of buried, would not have been up for the number of masks that I've made at this point. I think I'm up to 60-ish that I've already made, plus the 30 I'm in process of, plus this one. So this, so yeah, it'll be quite a few. So, and it's just that seam allowance that you cut. And since you chalked the line, you can kind of follow that line for your guide for where to sew. And you'll do the same thing on your 2 long pieces. This one doesn't have chalk on it. I just realized that. I love the little thread cutter that's on the side of this machine. It's in a very convenient spot to make your life easier. Okay, so now that we have that done, and yes, this is a different pair of scissors. I have so many pairs. This one's funny because it says fabric only down the blade of it, because at some point I had to actually make sure that nobody used my fabric scissors for anything other than fabric. So what you're going to do here, if I can not lose my grip on it, is clip the corners, or the edge, the curved edge. So you just cut it every, half inch or so, all the way around this corner here. And you'll do the same thing on the longer piece, that's the back or front, or however you want to work it. And then you take this and you pull it open. So this one is 4 layers because you've got the 2 front pieces and the 2 lining pieces. And if you just kind of push all of the little notches to one side, then what you're going to do is we're going back to the machine here, and you're going to stitch that set of tabs to one side, which is called flat felling your seam. When you push it to one side and stitch it down, basically it just means that it's not going to move back and forth inside of your mask. And I just kind of check periodically to make sure that I've gotten all the side there properly. And sometimes you miss 1 or 2. It's not the end of the world. It's just to try to make it a little more comfortable. Okay, so that's our flat felled seam right there. See how it's just pushed to one side. Now, if you're one of those people that really likes the aesthetic of evenness, you could put a seam down this side just for the sake of matching. I honestly haven't been, because I've been making so many of these that it would take me way too long to do that. So now we're going to do the same thing with this piece. We're going to clip the seams, we're going to flat fell it, and then we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, so now you have one piece that's done and your longer piece that's done. And you want to put the right sides together. So what I do is I flip this one to where the outside is facing out and our lining is on the inside. And this one I leave with that flat felt seam pointed out, and we set one piece inside of the other piece. And I like to match up this bottom seam right here first. So I look to see where my seams are, I match them out, and then I follow it over to one side. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to stitch all the way across this bottom, and then we're going to stitch across the top, and then we have our next step, which is going to be clipping the curve of this whole top seam, and then flipping it inside out. Okay, so now you have one piece that's done and your longer piece that's done. And you want to put the right sides together. So what I do is I flip this one to where the outside is facing out and our lining is on the inside. And this one I leave with that flat felt seam pointed out, and we set one piece inside of the other piece. And I like to match up this bottom seam right here first. So I look to see where my seams are, I match them out, and then I follow it over to one side. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to stitch all the way across this bottom, and then we're going to stitch across the top, and then we have our next step, which is going to be clipping the curve of this whole top seam, and then flipping it inside out. Okay, so now that we have it right side out, so you should see clean seams on both sides. What I do is I just kind of tug in the middle first and kind of straighten out that center seam to make sure I've gotten it good, and kind of follow it down the sides. And then I'll go over to the iron and I'll actually iron down the edge of the outsides here. You do have to be a little careful. A lot of these reusable bags are meltable because they're made out of recycled plastic. So you really want to be careful that you're just ironing that very outside seam. And then once you have those seams ironed down on the outside, you would fold over a little bit here and iron that down and then fold it again. So I have one that's already at that stage right over here. So this one's been fully ironed, and as you see, we've got a double fold. So fold it over about halfway to where you really want it to be, iron that, and then fold it the rest of the way. And when you fold it the rest of the way, this should overlap. See, here's your shorter piece here. You want this to overlap the end of that so that it cases in everything at the same time. And what we do now is I kind of unfold that. The seams are there, you know, the folds are there, set with iron, so they should stay good. And I do a run all the way across the top and down across the bottom to kind of seal that in so that you've got like that top stitch to keep it from sliding around on you. had a stray string there that I cut off. Oh, I always started off slow because a couple of times I've had it kind of pull the fabric underneath, and I'm not quite sure why. This is a new machine to me, so I'm sure as I get used to using it, I'll figure out how to fix that problem. But it only does it occasionally, which is really kind of odd. Okay, I'm probably going to have to clean this one up a little bit more. So because it caught for whatever reason on that one end, there's a weird loop down here. But honestly, that's going to be hidden. So now you follow those iron lines that you did and fold it over to create your casing. And it overlaps that underneath part here. And I've been doing a double stitch line on this one because it needs to be strong, because that's what the elastic is going to pull against. And there's also a couple of different things I've done at this point. So where'd they go? Oh, there they are. For ones that go around the ear loop, I have been using these. They're the Scunci extra thick hair bands. So they're bigger than a lot of them are. And so, I mean, obviously, the more you use them, the more they stretch, the easier it is. But what I've been doing when I do this is that I'll feed it through at this point, like that, before I sew down this edge. And then I do the edge the same way. This one here is already completed. Well, up to that point. See how I've just got I've got a double row of stitching here, and it has a casing here. So with this one, I would put either a string or elastic through both sides. So it would go through this end, have a loop down here, and through this end, and then you would tie it on, or if it's elastic, tie it at a length that's comfortable for you. So that's what this one is going to be. So I'll finish this one as an ear loop style. And what I'm doing is just kind of backing it up a little bit at the beginning. A full line down. And with the needle still buried, I guess it would help if this was over here. With the needle still buried in there, I'm lifting the foot, turning it a quarter turn, setting it back down, advancing it one stitch manually, lifting back up the foot, turning it again, dropping it down, and then I'm trying to grab these strings to make sure they're out of the way, because otherwise it can get caught up in your second stitch row. And then right at the end I do a little back stitch. And then, oh, it goes down in there. And there you go, there's one side done. I just grab the scissors, clip that off. I also have a garbage can right next to me so that it makes this a little easier to contain the mess. Because this is also my workstation at the moment. My work laptop is, well, you can see my computer monitor right there, and my laptop is up here at the moment. There's a crate underneath the laptop that's been Harry's spot to sleep if she wants to come see me while I'm working. At the moment, though, it's full of masks that are in progress, honestly. All right, so let's sew this last one here. If you stop and the needle's not buried, it's really easy to advance it back or forward that little bit to get it buried again. Strings. And there we have it. One mask ready to use. Now I have to lift up my glasses before trying to put one of these on my face, but and there you go. Now you're safe when you go out to the grocery store. So if you didn't want the ear loop style, like the one I just finished, you can do it like this one here, where you just have full casings, and this is it. Now this is a piece of elastic I cut already to the length that I figured would be acceptable for most people. This is a tool that I have that has a hook on one end and a loop on the other to hold on to. And basically it's for exactly this. It's for threading things through a casing or for turning a small casing inside out. So I happen to have a fantastic tool that makes my life really a lot easier doing these, because I sew just enough for that to be necessary in my life. But you can also just as easily take a, let's see, where's my pin cushion? I think it's under here. Yep. You can just as easily take a safety pin. There's one. Take that safety pin, attach it to one end, just put it through the elastic or string that you're using, and close it, and then fish that through the casing. It's obviously not as quick as my other method, but it's pretty easy to shift that through there if you left a good sized casing. Then you just remove this. I mean, I suppose you could do it all the way through both sides, but let's put this back under here where it's out of the way. So there you have it. Now this one's ready to give to somebody who can adjust these strings as necessary. So the back loop would go towards the base of your head here, and this would tie up here. So I guess I could show you that too. Let me take these off though, because again, I have to have this off of my face. So you could just put this on the back, bring it down, set it here. If this was just ties, you would just stretch it up this way and tie it in a knot or a bow up here. This one's elastic, so whoever this one ends up going to could get it set on the face the way they feel it's comfortable, but you want to make sure it totally covers your nose and kind of hooks underneath your chin a little bit, because that's what helps get it snug. And you would pull that cord to what's snug but comfortable for you, tie a knot in it here, and then once that knot's there, you can really easily take it on and off all the time. But since these ones will not eventually be mine and need to be washed, obviously now, because they were both on my face, I will not be tying that string. So there we go. 2 different ways for the elastic side of things. I just dropped my little thing on the tool on the floor. But 2 different ways that you can use the same pattern to make either the ear loop. And honestly, even with the ear loop ones, if you can't find the really big hair ties like this, you can use a shorter piece of elastic, put it through here, tie it off. I have one somewhere, but I think it's in the other room that I did that one with. So you could just have 2 shorter pieces of elastic and just fish them through like this one, tie it in a knot, and then just scoot it to where the knot is inside of this so it's not ugly and obnoxious. Well, there you have it. That's how to make it in 2 different ways, either with the elastic that ties around or with an ear loop. And now that I have that video done, I get to finish all of these ones. This is 20 more that I have sewn the fronts together and the backs together and need to finish. A couple up here that are sewn together, flipped and ironed, but no top stitching. And this set over here that's just ready for their elastic. Because when I made some for my cousin and her husband wore his to work, his boss said, "Where did you get that? And can that person make me about 30 for the rest of the employees?" I love that his boss is worried about his employees at this point. It is kind of hard to get 30 of these done when I'm still working a full-time job from home, but I'm definitely trying to get these all done for him because I appreciate that his boss is trying to keep their employees safe. And if anybody can have use out of this, again, I will link the pattern I use down below. It's a printable PDF that you can use. Somebody else came up with it, not me. I don't have any rights to this pattern. I'm just trying to help people out as much as I can. And I honestly thought maybe I'm going to take the patterns, because I have printed out 4 times, one for each of the sizes, and cut them out. But I think I might put them on a heavier paper, like glue it down to a heavier paper and draw that seam allowance on and then cut it out to that size so that it makes it easier instead of freehanding it on every single one. I honestly, in making these 30, I found that I wasn't always getting them consistent. And so some of them severely did not match up, and I had to actually restitch to make them match close enough to be able to stitch them together because they were so far off. But I think if I had cut it out with the seam allowance already on the paper, and then I could just draw a chalk line and copy that chalk line every single time, that would probably be beneficial. I'm not asking for a lot of money for any of these either, so I'm not making any kind of a profit off of the ones I'm making for people. I'm only charging $5 a piece so that I can cover the cost. And honestly, for some family members, I haven't even asked for money. I've had a couple donate money anyways, even though I didn't ask. I've had people donate supplies. I honestly made some masks for one friend, and she paid me in a chunk of fabric and a couple of reusable bags, and I'm totally fine with that. Because the most important thing to me right now is just to get people masks so that they can stay safe. So if you do need one and you can't sew, let me know once I'm done with these 30, which will probably be today. I will see what I can do to do additional orders. I am still working a full-time job though, so keep that in mind if you need a mask and you want one made. It may take a little bit of time for me to get it done just because I am working. I am sewing during my lunch breaks and sometimes before work and most of the time after work. So I've been sewing a lot. I hope that video is helpful for you guys to know the process, or if you want to make them yourself to help you know what the steps I've found. I've also found that if you're doing a whole bunch, it's easier to do them in steps. So like with these 30 masks that I'm doing right now, I cut out all the insides, all of the fronts, all of the backs, all of the liners. And then I matched up all of the liners and fronts. And then I sewed all the liners and fronts. And then I sewed all the backs. Then I matched up all of the fronts and backs. And then I started the next step. And I did get 10 of them stitched completely and then went over to the ironing board, only because when they're at this stage of needing to be ironed, they're really obnoxious and hard to stack. So once I had 10 of them to that stage, I went over to the ironing board and ironed those. And then I figured, well, they're already ironed. I might as well top stitch them, do their casings, and finish that set of 10, set them to the side so they're out of the way. But I do feel that assembly lining it in that way does help a lot. A couple of weeks ago, Larissa was here and she helped me out, and we had a good system going, honestly. So if you have a helper, but you don't both know how to sew, you can have the person who can't sew help you with tracing out the patterns and cutting them out. Once you do the sewing parts and they need to be flipped inside out, you can hand them to the person that can't sew to flip them inside out. The person that can't sew can put in the elastic for you, or even do the ironing if they're, depending on their age, of course, and how adept they are. Rissa's 22, so obviously she was able to do all the steps that are non-sewing. And honestly, if I gave her a little instruction, she could probably learn the sewing part too. She just never has sewn really with a machine, so she did all the non-sewing. So if you have a helper, definitely put them to work. Make them help you with the parts that aren't sewing. Help them with the ironing, help with the cutting out, depending on their age. It can be kind of a fun project for the whole family to work together to make masks, so that when you do have to go out in public, you have something to keep yourself a little bit safe.